My name is Dumanis. I have two hats. So I'm the Executive Vice President for Coalition for Aligning Science, but I'm also the Deputy Director for a large funding initiative known as ASAP, or Aligning Science Across Parkinsons. So I was asked to be on this panel to provide the funder perspective as a private funder of what we're doing with data sharing. And I also took it as an opportunity, because there are publishers in the room, sort of if I had a genie and I could make publishers do things, what I would like them to do. So what is Aligning Science Across Parkinsons? We're a fairly new initiative. We're launched in 2019, and we are about accelerating the pace of discovery and informing the path to a cure for Parkinson's disease through three main facets: collaboration, research enabling resources, and data sharing. Since we have launched in 2019, we've deployed over $500 million. So we do a lot of funding around the world. I'm not going to go into our programs, but just to say that we fund resource programs, but also team science around the world that is multidisciplinary and multi-institutional. And the reason that I was asked to be here today is we have very progressive open science policies. We were built and conceived to be open science by design. Our rationale being, if we're spending over $500 million, we want to have the research community benefit from it. Otherwise, our funding could go to waste. So what is our policy? So first and foremost, all manuscripts that have been given ASAP funding need to be posted in a preprint repository upon submission for a journal to review, or sooner if they would like. The second is that you need to have it immediately free and online once it is published with a CC license, CC BY license. The third is that all research outputs, so not just data, but also the code and the protocols, et cetera, they should also be deposited in publicly available repositories at the time of publication and cited correctly. The fourth is attribution to ASAP. And the fifth is we also started creating our own research output management system so that we could catalog our outputs and just understand what is happening in the ecosystem at large. I highlight this policy only to say that we are already in compliance with the Nelson Memo, which is great. So we've been in the trenches and we know some of the lessons learned. So I'm going to talk really quickly about what that experience has been like. So I joined ASAP in 2021 in that January, and my first job as deputy director was, this is an amazing policy. How are we actually going to enforce it and track it? So this is a very high-level schematic, but essentially the way that we do our discovery process is we partnered with OA Works, so through their tool OA Report, to help do some of the discovery process. We pilot it with our CRN, which is our teams. Each team has a project manager that is embedded in the team. It's part of the budget process, and one of their roles is to feed that information to us. And then we partnered with dataseer.ai, so essentially any single time a paper comes to us, we upload it into the Dataseer system. They use natural language processing, and they extract the information, such as here are the data collections that we've observed, here are the protocol sections, and is there a link or is there not a link? There's a curation process, and we work collaboratively on our team with Dataseer to create that creation process. Then we go back to the authors. We have the preprint as our training tool, so they can version it as needed until we get to the publication report. The whole goal here is to actively work with our awardees in this compliance process and get lessons learned, because eventually we want to be able to scale. So the biggest lesson learned for me was that ASAP grantees are on board with data sharing. So we have to stop talking about why data sharing is good. People understand it intuitively, but no one knows what they're supposed to be doing. And that is the biggest problem. And so really for me, it's the user experience, both from the awardee that wants to share the data, but also from the funder who's trying to figure out and help that awardee. So here are some of my wishes. One, we want to make data sets findable. So one potential solution is thinking about the data availability statement or a research output availability statement, just to make it easier to track compliance in a scalable way and have that synced into the metadata to be able to read that. Not all publishers offer data availability statements, and some publishers just have different requirements. And so if I had a wish, it would be my call to action is just take collective action in this pre-competitive state to just create those consistent standards along with funders to be able to do that. The second big thing is no one knows what to do with supplemental data, right? So all data in a perfect world would be in an established repository and not deposited as supplemental material. And the reason for that is they're not machine readable or discoverable, so you can't really scale and understand what those outputs are. There's no metadata standards, so you can't archive it. And there's no persistent identifier. So if you want to be compliant with the Nelson Memo, supplementals is not the way to go. But at the end of the day, authors would love to upload their information and supplemental data to a journal because it's so much easier and obvious in the workflow. And so it's very confusing to go back to a grantee who has said, I have shared my source data, it is right here. I mean to say, can you just upload it to another repository and do that step over again? And if given the option from publishers, they're going to take the supplemental route. And so another call to action is for publishers to align on what they want to do with supplemental data, just to make it easier to understand what those standards are. The third thing that we were really interested in was just understanding how user behavior is. So we took a look back and just assessed the first version of a manuscript that went through our system compared to the second version after we gave them the feedback. And because this is about data sharing, I specifically looked at new data sets shared. And you can see in blue, that's the first version. In green, that's the second version. And essentially, most people, when you tell them to share their data, in the second version will share their data. But not everybody does. So we went back and asked them, why didn't you share your data even though we told you you should? And the key takeaway is most will share, but issues often occur with co-authors who are not part of the ASAP grant or did that data set before ASAP started funding. And so then you're in this awkward conversation of sort of, you can't control people outside of your funder network. And so as a funder, even with the best of intentions and amazing resources, it's a very thorny situation. But publishers can require all co-authors to do something versus someone who is only collectively funding some authors. So for example, if an ASAP awardee is 1 out of 20 authors, it's hard for an ASAP awardee to sort of force the other co-authors to do what they would like. The other thing, just to get more nuanced, that I've been thinking a lot about as well is what data sets should be shared, right? So we worked with Dataseer to sort of create these rules so that we had some starting standard. And it was very simply defined as an action where some device captures features in the real world that can translate into data points in a computer, right? But some common questions are all data sets created equal? Because really what we want is data sets for metadata purposes to be able to leverage the power. And often there isn't a conversation about what those data sets should be. And so again, another opportunity for publishers is to sort of take collective action with funders to sort of have those conversations about what data sets we should be prioritizing and working together to align on those policies. At the end of the day, the reason that we care as ASAP and probably most funders is if we're funding in a disease area, we want to accelerate discovery and outcomes. Often funders will align that open science can fuel that, and we want to build a legacy. But it's very hard for us to make the case if we can't talk about impact. And so one of the other frustrating things is metadata standards are not aligned in the publishing field, and so if I as a funder want to sort of talk about how good open science is, it's very hard for me to make the case unless I invest in my own infrastructure, which is why we started creating our own research output management system, which is not scalable and creates a siloed community. So those are my thoughts.